Hi, my name is Adam Neely, and welcome to Question and Answer Time. I'm here answering all of your interesting questions about odd subjects in bass and music in general. So let's begin.
Question and Answer Time with Adam.
How much would a band charge for a gig? Are there any standards? Do you charge for a musician? Nobody ever seems to give me a good answer on this.
There's actually a couple good reasons why nobody has given you a straight answer on this. Not just in music, but across all fields. Generally, freelancers and small businesses do not like to give their prices out because they like to have a little bit of room for negotiation depending on the different contexts of the different clients, and they also want to have the ability to increase their price a little bit later. The other thing is the market. Market rates are very different in New York versus what they might be in, say, like Jacksonville, Florida. You really have to talk to people who are local on the scene to get more of an idea of exactly what to charge when. From that wedding band video, I can tell you, I don't actually know how much they charge for the client, but I'm guessing it's anywhere in between $7,000 and $10,000, which is actually a little bit on the lower side when you consider the market, upscale, like high-profile wedding bands in the New York metro area. So I hope that sort of answered your question. I know I'm still giving you the runaround, but hey, that's exactly what it's going to be.
Love the video, but I have a question. Why is it that a tonal piece like Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You ends up being so atonal when put through the process kind of described in the video?
It's a good question. It has to do with the harmonic series. So basically, whenever you sing a note or play a note, there's a bunch of extra notes which sort of occur at the same time. And those extra notes are notes in the harmonic series, and they're the notes which actually give the initial note that you sang, like the C or whatever, the sound of like a voice or the sound of a violin or a bass or whatever. And when like us humans, we don't really like perceive those extra notes. Instead, we sort of perceive the initial note, like the fundamental pitch C or whatever, and those extra notes are kind of like decoration on top. However, when you analyze them and when you run them through the MIDI conversion process on computers will pick up all the extra stuff on top, and that extra stuff actually might be very dissonant and outside of whatever key you're playing in, and in fact outside of the equal temperament system of tuning that we have. And that's why you get that sort of glorious mess of MIDI notes in the Mariah Carey. It's because the computer is picking up on all that extra stuff, and especially when you go into the recording studio and record, when a compression and EQ and saturation are added, all of that extra stuff in the harmonic spectrum is especially brought more to the foreground, so the computer can really latch onto that and add all of that extra MIDI noise, which I love the sound of. It doesn't quite sound correct or tonal or anything, but it's glorious. So yeah.
Hi Adam, maybe it's not the best place to ask my question, but I'll ask it here. Could you share with us your thoughts on future of mainstream music and particularly live instruments in it? I mean real drums, real bass, real guitars, and so on. I think we completely stuck in 70s and 80s, especially rock-oriented genres. There are so many tech gurus and so little new ideas, imho. It's just about speed and loudness. For about a year, I'm heavy listening trance music, drum and bass, and breaks, and I must admit it's usually more inspiring than almost any new track/song in traditional live genres. So my second question, what could I do in those electronic genres as an average bass player? I'm 100% sure that computer with sequencer on it could do better bass parts than me.
So I think the really exciting thing right now that a lot of people are trying out is taking electronic music and translating it live with live instruments. And people have done this to varying degrees of success, because there are definitely times where it doesn't work. But if you haven't checked them out already, check out Nerve. They're kind of like the kings of doing this. Also check out Mr. Barrington or Animus Rex. Love what they are doing. Now, to answer your second question, the role of bass guitar, it's a little bit tricky because the sound of a bass guitar doesn't quite work in a lot of electronic music contexts. It doesn't quite fulfill the same role that a synth bass does, because there's not enough sub-low end content within the sound and the harmonic spectrum of a bass guitar. And so you kind of have to figure out how to get that. And a lot of people use like affected bass, like with octave pedals like the Boss OC2 or other pedals to sort of get that sound. But you also sometimes hear the bass guitar in certain contexts. If you ever want to check it out, there's some really awesome bass playing in Zed's Clarity. It's just not mixed to the foreground that a normal bass guitar normally would. You can also think about how Thundercat treats the bass guitar almost soloistically and chordally in an electronic music context, and it works out really awesome for him. The other thing to take into consideration is the sort of reverse engineering of the electronic music for the bass or for the bass guitar is kind of a challenge, and it really requires a significant amount of study and appreciation of what electronic music is and what people do to sequence electronic music and make it. Drummers have been dealing with this for a long time. Jojo Mayer of the band Nerve talks about reverse engineering jungle beats a lot, but this is something that you have to really think about as a bass player if you're wanting to play electronic music live.
Hello, Mr. Neely. I'm a big fan of your work. Question. I'm a beginner and have a little U-bass. I love the big sound, one's amplified, and the light action, but because of its unique shape, I find my right-hand technique a bit wonky. It is hard to keep my wrist from overbending, and it often hurts. Are you familiar with this kind of instrument? Any suggestion to help me keep my wrist straighter? Thank you very much.
I am a fan of the U-bass too. They're really awesome little instruments. It is tricky because you don't have the body to keep your forearm sort of on. My big suggestion, and you'll see it right here, is to raise your shoulder like this and play bass like this. And it will feel and look really stupid, but your wrist will be completely straight as you do it. Todd Johnson is a bass player that has some instructional videos. He talks about floating thumb technique, and that's his thing. Yeah, it will tire out your shoulder pretty quickly, but the muscles in your shoulder are infinitely stronger, maybe not infinitely, but a lot stronger than the muscles in your forearm and your wrist, so it's better to tire them out than to tire your wrist. Eventually you'll develop the muscle strength and stamina in your shoulder to do that.
Dude, your videos and information rock. Was searching for useful info to improve my musical knowledge, and you got it, man. The format and presentation is on point. I'm entertained and educated. Bravo. I think just about every bassist I admire composes from keyboard, maybe except Thundercat. But why exactly is a bass not ideal for composing? Or does it just take Thundercat-esque musical knowledge and a six string to really start making any headway? Hadrian Farrow, who kills with chord/changes/comping, doesn't even compose on bass. Is it simply this instrument wasn't intended to be chordal and makes composing really a not great idea? If the bass is really just the shittiest thing to compose on, I'll give in and get to work on guitar/piano. Was kind of hoping I was just missing some little thought about concept. Ciao!
Honestly, bass is kind of a shitty instrument for composing. You can write awesome bass lines on it, of course, but when you're writing chords and melodies, it can be a little bit, that's a little bit limiting. And piano is not limiting in basically any way for when you're trying to compose songs and melodies and compositions. I had a professor in graduate school, Phil Markowitz, say that the piano is like the orchestra, except it's in black and white, and the orchestra is in full Technicolor. And I like to think about it that way because the piano, basically everything that you could ever possibly want, ever possibly need, is right there in terms of harmony and melody. And I also understand the desire to no, I'm gonna go at it alone, I'm gonna compose on bass. And every time I've tried to do that, because I've done that sort of thing a couple times, it's remained too limiting for me. And I really just find myself going back to the piano or the computer to sequence things.
Absolute nonsense. Most classical musicians don't play in an orchestra, buddy. We are yelled at every day in conservatories to internalize beat, and guess what? We are allowed to tap our feet while we're learning. Next, orchestral instrumentalists have to learn to play after the beat. It's a specific skill we have to learn because that is how orchestral conductors have taken to conducting ahead of the beat so that they can communicate to the musicians what they want. Next, Ravel is an impressionist composer, which means rubato is a part of the musical style, and in order to accurately perform chamber music with rubato, we have to feel the subdivisions like crazy, otherwise we wouldn't be in time together. Do you get that? Yes, the tempo is changing, but tempo is changing as an ensemble. Ain't no rhythm section/drummer doing it for us. Finally, watch a choral conductor. Chances are that he conducts the beat. Like I said, conducting in front of the beat is a skill developed by conductors so they can communicate with the musicians. For musicians/orchestra to be able to play as a whole while the conductor is 3/16 notes ahead of the beat is an insanely difficult skill to develop. And 3 against 2 is not a simple rhythm. It is a polyrhythm.
So there's some good points brought up here, and there have been a lot of good responses in terms of people disagreeing with what I was saying in the How Classical Musicians Feel Music Differently video. First thing I want to talk about is the idea that classical musicians don't internalize the beat, and I never really said that. I said I was generalizing about the differences between the two of them. There's, of course, a lot of times where classical musicians have to really internalize the beat, and a lot of times where jazz, rock, and pop musicians have to react to the beat. But as a rule of thumb, that is kind of the difference between the two sorts of rhythmic ideas. And I'm saying that they're different. I'm not saying that one's better than the other. I'm saying that they're very different. And when it comes to jazz, rock, and pop music, yeah, we internalize the beat, and we do, and that's our thing. Because if we don't internalize the beat, if we don't have a really strong rhythmic sense, it sounds off. Especially bass players, man. Bass players and drummers, we have to be lockstep. Otherwise, it does not sound right. It does not create the aesthetic that we are going for. And it has a lot to do with the sharp attack transients of the drums. And if we're off by several milliseconds, it does not sound right. And yes, milliseconds. Milliseconds is the sort of degree of precision that we're aiming here for. So for your second point about how the conductor conducts what he wants ahead of the beat and then the orchestra tries to interpret it, that's actually proving my point about how the orchestra is reacting to the conductor rather than being phase-locked or lockstep with one another. And I can understand why that is, for sure. It might be different depending on different contexts, different styles of music, different preferences between the musicians, but that's, again, kind of proving my point about the two different, like, rhythmic styles. So next, your point about the impressionistic sense of rubato. Yes, of course you have to feel subdivisions in that, but my main point is that the way that jazz, rock, and pop musicians feel subdivisions is extremely metronomic versus the sort of ebb and flow that's necessary within the music of the rubato, where it's a little bit more organic and you sort of feel the breath of the collective musicians, and everybody's locked in through that breath and that organic sort of sense of time flow. And I ran into this problem because I'm not super used to playing that way when I was doing the Bartók string quartet video, where I was playing along to a recording of a Bartók string quartet. And yeah, it was hard to lock in with the other musicians because even though it was relatively steady, the tempo, like, it was moving in and out like this, like a little bit of like an accordion. I guess you can think of it that way. And it was hard to lock in. It felt very musical, but it required a sort of rewiring my brain to feel it that way. Oh, and by the way, 3/2, yes, it's a polyrhythm, but it's a very simple one. It's the simplest polyrhythm, and it's an extremely important rhythm to know how to play regardless of style, because it pops up everywhere across all styles of music, all continents of music. Just, you gotta know how to be able to play 3/2. And the fact that double bass player from the video couldn't play it along with a metronome is quite telling. And yes, it's kind of a cheap shot, one, because I'm sort of implying that classical musicians can't do that. Of course they can, don't get me wrong, but it's also a cheap shot because I'm taking aim at this, working professional. But I feel completely confident in taking that cheap shot because this guy is in a position of power. He's a teacher at a university that controls the fate of whether or not a person gets into the university, and also is a teacher who gets paid fairly decently, and students have to pay a lot of money to go and learn from him. And if he can't do 3/2, he deserves at least this YouTuber calling him out on it.
Me again, another question. What do you think about the 432 Hz tuning? It's shrouded in a mystery. Who uses it, when, why, and so on. Thank you for all of the great videos you put out on your channel. They are priceless and very open-minding. Shay.
All right, 432. If you're not familiar with all of the internet links that are surrounding 432, it's supposed to be a more perfect tuning system that's more in tune with the harmonic spectrum of the universe. And Nazis invented 440 tuning, which is our current standard tuning for A in the 30s or whatever. That's complete bullshit. Yeah, it really is. I like 432 just because it sounds very different than 440. If you consider the history of tuning, it's actually really interesting because over the centuries, it's changed a lot depending on the country. It wasn't until relatively recently when it was standardized as 440, but it has been everywhere between roughly 415 and 455. So there's been a huge spectrum of tuning. And it's all kind of been arbitrary, depending on like whatever country you're in. I like 432 just because it sounds different, like I said, but honestly, I almost like 430 a little bit better than 432 because it sounds even more different than 440. It sounds a little bit more mellow, I guess. It has a very different sound. It really does, I think. The new Jacob Collier video that just came out, he starts the song in 432, and then by the end, it's in 440. It's a really interesting effect. You should check it out. Links in the description, by the way. I played with a saxophone player for a while, and I still play with him, where he liked tuning in 445. And you'd think, well, 445 is definitely a more aggressive, intense sort of sound than 440. It really, because our ears are so accustomed to 440, 445, I don't know, it's pretty intense. It's pretty biting. It's pretty aggressive. And, a lot of metal musicians like down tuning wherever, I think they should be up tuning ever so slightly to 445 because it really creates a lot of tension. It's a really like sort of feeling, especially when you're used to 440. So maybe experiment with that if you'd like.